Tehmina, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Tehmina Beg. I'm a visual effects supervisor for the Molecule, which is also now Crafty Apes. Been in the visual effects industry for about 11 years now. And yeah, made it into on-set supervision, I don't know, 6 or 7 years back. And been doing it ever since.
I love that. And one thing I always ask all my guests, because I'm always fascinated by how different the answers always are, but I guess growing up, did you always imagine yourself in some kind of creative role, or was it something you more fell into later on?
I did. Growing up, I always wanted to be in some sort of a creative role. You know, I drew a lot. I was big into drawing and painting, always big into, designing monsters and stuff like that. I loved doing that. And as I got older, I got a little bit into photography. But around age 10 or 11, there was a TV show on the Discovery Channel called Movie Magic. I don't know if you remember this show.
I was obsessed with it. I was in Australia, so I only got to see a couple episodes, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. It was a TV show that would cover every aspect of filmmaking. So every episode would be, one on pyrotechnics, one on special effects makeup, one on miniatures, and it was just like, that was my absolute favorite. So yeah, that was sort of a big inspiration for what I wanted to do, for sure. All that world building.
I love that. Yeah, I think for me, especially because it was kind of not pre-internet, but the internet wasn't how it is today. And so for me, there wasn't, I think there was like VFX Pro and VFX HQ, which is Todd Vazari's old website. This is like 96. Like there wasn't that much information around. So piecing together everything, just seeing little things like garbage mats or things like that, you're like, oh, I think I get it now, or what, you know, understand keyframing, all this stuff that's so obvious now. You just go on YouTube, but back then it was very cryptic. That's so cool. And I'm curious too, like, I know that just doing a bit of stalking / research, obviously you didn't start right away in visual effects, so you were more in a technical role. So I was kind of curious about that. Like, how did you first get into visual effects? And also, I guess, like, what was the catalyst, having done something quite different to visual effects?
So, hey, I grew up wanting to be an artist and doing all this creative stuff, but I also had a dad who was an engineer. And he just that was like a big influence for me. It's like, gotta do the right thing and be a doctor and an engineer. So when I went to college, I bounced around a little bit in college. I did a little bit of audio engineering, but I ended up settling in this. At the time that I went to school, there was no field for visual effects, and I actually didn't even know what visual effects exactly was. I knew there was stuff in the movies, but I just didn't think it was possible to get in there. My realistic brain had kicked in. So I basically double majored in film and computer science.
Cool.
Because the only programs at the time that were somewhat animation related, I think, were like associate degrees. So because I majored in computer science and I grew up in Boston, that was, it's sort of like a no-brainer. Of course, I'm going to get a job at a program, as a programmer somewhere. So I interviewed around, ended up getting a job at a software security company, which was actually kind of cool because I ended up working for some pretty well-known hackers, and doing some sort of computer security research for them. A lot of just code scrubbing, looking for bugs, that kind of stuff. But obviously, that didn't sate my creative need. A couple years later, I decided that I would move to New York and try and work for a more creative agency where I would still be in the computer field, but I basically went to work for a company called Code and Theory, who does, they do web design. They do really nice websites. And so, I was hoping to get more closer to the design field or something creative there. Still practical. I at some point really, really wanted to just kind of jump into design and do more design. They said, hey, well, why don't you take a flash class or something? So I said, fine. I went and looked at SVA, checked out, I got a flash class. Okay, cool. But then for just, shits and giggles, I just clicked on the grad programs just to see. And it says, computer animation, visual art, and all this stuff. And I was just like,
fun stuff.
Why did I not do this before? I'm like, where was this when I was 18? I was so sad. And then I was like, you know what, screw this. So I just on a whim applied to SVA. And then because I applied there, I applied to a few other places too. and I ended up getting into all of them. I thought, well, I can't turn this one down. So I ended up going to NYU for their computer art, digital imaging and design program. And again, I didn't quite know exactly what visual effects was at the time. I mean, I knew what it was, but not the details. I didn't really know 3D lighting, this, that, and the other. So I got in, started doing school there, and found my forte as a 3D artist, 3D lighter specifically, but generalist basically. I came out of NYU as a 3D generalist. My first internship was with PsyOp and Mass Market.
Love those guys.
Yeah, which was a great place to get my feet wet. I mean, like, they just jumped me right into some big commercials, and I got some great experience under my belt there. I met a ton of people, and through them, I ended up.
I was going to say the cupcake place next door is dangerous.
Yes, yes. Oh, so you know.
Oh yeah. No, I've done it.
Yeah, that whole neighborhood was dangerous.
So yeah, I was just constantly drinking all over.
Yeah.
So it was always fun.
I can't remember the name of the bar that everybody used to go to around the corner, but it doesn't matter. They were everywhere.
There's probably only like one bar in New York I remember, because it's just, you geographically know where everything is. So it's so rare that you actually think of names. It's the one in Lower East Side that you're always going to, or Upper West Side. And
yeah, it was just the one dive bar that we always went to. But no, that whole neighborhood was a lot of fun, and that was a fun time and a fun place to work, because there's just a lot of great people in and out. And yeah, through a couple of them, I mean, honestly, I met all of my freelancer friends through there. And I think the reason I was able to get so many freelance gigs was because I just made a lot of friends there. And yeah, my first actual gig after school was at the mill, which I had gotten through, a series of tubes, through people I knew at PsyOp. Yeah, and then from there on, I bounced around freelance for 3-4 years. And then the New York tax credits started kicking in, so I think a lot more TV started showing up here. And I worked for an editing, what do you call it? I guess it was technically a production company. I worked for a production company, but they also did their own posts. And this teacher, he was a teacher of mine at NYU, also a VFX supervisor, and he knew that I wanted to do on-set work, so he dragged me out on set to West Virginia, where I kind of had my first foray into, just doing the on-set stuff. I mean, I was just an assistant at the time, but.
What was it like? Because usually it's one of those things that you start to work your way up, and then it's kind of like go back to the bottom again, because it's like you're now being introduced to working on set. So like, what was it like getting to, jump into getting some on-set experience really early on?
It was good. It was cold. I gotta say, it's really funny. I hadn't experienced that kind of cold in a long time, and it made me go out and buy a really nice jacket afterwards, because I froze my ass off. I didn't expect West Virginia to be so freezing, but it was. Yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years in. So, I mean, it wasn't like I felt like I was getting the leg up. I was super excited to go. And, my teacher, he had been a VFX supervisor for a while and just really experienced guy. So it was great to just see how all of that worked. It's intimidating. I mean, when you first go, it's just sort of like everybody's yelling, just, you don't want to step on anybody's toes, that the time is short. But it was definitely eye-opening, and I thought it was really cool. We had taken over an abandoned factory in West Virginia, and art department completely converted the lower half to old, like 1920s New York. So cool. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I'm like, this is the world of make-believe. This is kind of what I always wanted to do when I was a little kid. I just didn't have a word for it. Aside from completely freezing my ass off, it was amazing. And then, we came back to the office, and it was just it was a production company. So it was just a small in-house team. And the fun part is I got to work on the shots that I was on set for. So I ended up doing, my first sort of like visual effects, matte paintings and CG work for a TV show. And it was the fun stuff. It's the world building stuff. We got to kind of like build and research 1920s and 30s and 40s in New York and, rebuild it. And I love doing that. That's like my favorite thing. So yeah, getting to be on set for it and actually working on the shots was really fun.
I'll just jump in and say, like, I've always kind of found it kind of weird when you see things like, once they're final, like on the big screen, and it looks so polished, and that just inches to the left or right there's like scaffolding and everything's made of styrofoam, but it looks so authentic.
I know, it's so funny how once you've been there, you're like, oh, I know, just pan right and you'll see crafty.
That's great. Just to jump in a little bit, like I was kind of curious, like for you freelancing very early into your career, like what do you think were some of the benefits of doing that versus, let's say, a lot of people typically at the beginning of their career, they try to land security first, so they're going to go stay at one place and get nurtured, but obviously things move a lot slower when you're kind of staying at one spot.
I mean, hey, look, I wanted a staff job when I first got out, I was scared. I was like, what is this freelance? I've only ever been working for these programming companies as a salaried person. So yes, I wanted a staff job, coming out of school, but it was hard to get, And at the end of the day, I am glad that I went freelance first. I basically ended up in the period of like 2 years, I think, I worked for something like 20 companies. Obviously some of the gigs were 3 months, some of the gigs were 1 week. I was really worried about not being able to find consistent work. After my first year, I realized, okay, it's actually pretty consistent. Most of the time you're working 10 or 11 months out of the year, and you get a month off basically.
Yeah, it's nice.
I think the first few years of freelancing are really scary, but it really gives you some versatility. I think the most important thing about going that route is that you are eager, you're ready to jump in every time, you want to do a great job. It's difficult because you're always the new kid on the block, you're always the new kid at lunch. But it trains you to just be versatile and flexible and adaptable, and you got to adapt to different timelines. You have to adapt to different pipelines. You have to be able to work with all different kinds of people. And I think that makes you just like a really strong artist and just a strong person, you know what I mean? Just a versatile personality to work with. You can tolerate a lot more, there's no, oh, why do we have to do this? And it's like, no, that's what the money's for.
No, it's so true.
We don't complain.
No, that's right. I've always felt
happy
that
to be working.
early in your career, I think is really vital. Like me personally, I think that you get a lot of growth going freelance first, because you could go work at one place staff, and you're gonna. Like I've seen people that I've worked with, I've left when they're a junior, come back 10 years later, and now they're head of the department. But to their peers, they're still kind of treated as the junior in their eyes, And whereas like freelancing around, you can quickly revise your rate as you grow very quickly. You're, as you said, learning new pipelines. Even your reel, like the 20, 30 commercials you get in your first year of working freelance versus like, here's the 3 shots I did as a junior over a year because no one trusted me with more. So I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it really is a way to build some serious street cred. So you can, use that as leverage later.
Do you have any advice around that, like in terms of how to get your name out there? Because obviously in the beginning, if you're kind of shy and you're just like, okay, hopefully people will just give me work, it's not going to, you got to get out there and got to get people to think of you when it comes to certain projects. So for you, like what really helped get you to network with everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my advice would be, one of the main things is go freelance. It's scary, but it's worth it for all the reasons we just discussed. I mean, you just get all that experience. You meet so many more people. That's a really, really big deal. That's probably the biggest thing about freelancing is meeting everybody. I know that obviously post-pandemic, it's not the same. But for me, when I was younger, I did go to a lot of networking events. I went to VES events and NYU events and anything that was around where I could meet people from different studios. And, it always feels a little desperate in the beginning. It's like, oh, I don't know this person. How do I talk to them? But you just kind of have to keep getting out there. make sure your work's really good. I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of great students out there, a lot of great work, you know, young artists. So you have to compete. You have to compete, but it's not just about how good the work. It's twofold. It's like the work has got to be good, and you got to know people. So it's not easy, but it's possible.
Yeah. No,
you got to be good, and you got to network.
That's exactly it. You know, I think it's one of those things also, just the more enthusiastic you are to take on anything, because early in my career, seeing a few people that felt they're too good for certain things.
Yeah.
And it's like they're literally starting out, and there's nothing that's going to stump your growth. Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I'm curious just to touch on your enthusiasm towards art very early on, drawing, painting. Were you able to leverage that later on, especially moving into more of a supervisor role, doing
Yes.
you know, paint overs, things like that?
Yes. Having an artistic background in general helped me. I mean, honestly, having an artistic and a technical background was super helpful, because the thing is, I do know a lot of creative people who struggled with Maya, and then I know a lot of technical people who struggled with like just having a good eye for something. So I know that not everybody can be both, but if you're one or the other, if you can always just kind of hone the other skill a little bit, that's always good. And as far as in the supervisor role, yeah, I do a lot of my own concept work and a lot of my own previs type of stuff. And it's crazy helpful having a 3D background. As an artist, when I obviously started out as a 3D lighter, but really became a generalist. And then from there, ended up randomly compositing and then becoming more of a matte painter. And so, you know, matte painting is kind of like one of those fields where you can just be a Photoshop collage type person, or you can, you know, you can do 3D projections or 2.5D projections. And so having that matte painting 2.5D situation is super helpful when I'm trying to visualize something, or just give concept work to the directly to the client. It's super helpful to have that.
Yeah, I used to be obsessed with matte painting back in like 97, 96 when I was like 14 or something. And Craig Mullins was always like my go-to for all the stuff he'd do. And that was kind of fascinating seeing the different styles you write, because you'd have people who are just kind of photo bashing everything, or people who would paint everything. And you rarely kind of met someone who'd do both. It's usually kind of one or the other. And but yeah, bit by bit, you know, as 2.5D came in as well, it was a great way for a lot of people to get the horizon lines and perspective and everything they needed correct, versus trying to eyeball it all. But I think, again, like the more that you move around the pipeline, more you have an understanding of what's possible, but also, let's say, the bits you're working on, how they're going to get passed on to the compositor, let's say, and being able to communicate what you need. If you're going to light something and it doesn't have proper edges, you can't get spec hits, you know, so being able to understand what to say to a modeler, so that way you can get what you need to light things properly. You know, all of this just really helps you be more proficient in the entire pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I guess the flip side, and you kind of hinted to this too, is having a technical background, being able to code. Did that help you a lot, being able to either automate tasks or just be more technical overall?
Honestly, I never really dug too hard into Python and tools and stuff. I did, you know, obviously, like there was scripting and stuff available in Nuke and Maya, and yeah, sure, I used it. But I think the biggest thing about having a technical background is just not getting frustrated. It literally, and it's this funny thing, it's like the biggest thing about being technical as a help for me was purely patience. Just having patience with the software, and knowing that when Maya crashes, like you don't have, I mean, yeah, I still have a little bit of a heart attack, you know, if I forgot to save, but it's not the same level of frustration that I have seen with other people who are just starting out with Maya, or like, you know, ripping their hair out kind of a thing. It's like, I already ripped my hair out, you know, 15 years ago, it's fine.
Just elaborate on that. Like, why do you think it is? You just understand that, you know, it's not a magic box where it's like, why is this happening to me? Or, you know, just...
It's that I understand that a computer is only going to do exactly what you tell it. There is no interpretation. There's no body language. There's no like, I'm picking up what you're putting down. No, the computer is only going to do precisely what you tell it to do. And if you forget, so if you leave out a detail, it's going to leave out that detail too, and it might result in some weird loop or something, some bug that just makes things explode. So there's I think the thing about being technical and having the patience for it is knowing that if something exploded, there's always a reason for it. And now in the case of something like Maya, we all know how that one is and how old that program is. So there's some bugs.
Yep. Yeah, just a couple.
We know it's a little black box, and that is still frustrating. As far as frustrations go, it was just a little bit easier, I found, knowing that there's always a solution to it.
Maybe you don't take it so personally when things crash, but I think you're right, because like the more technical you are, the more typically that you problem solve everything, and when you can understand why things are happening versus it being like this magic thing.
Problem solving is a big part of it, and it's not just problem solving, but it's the way you do it. It's so you're more methodical about it. You just kind of break things down into steps and you lay them out, and that's just how any algorithm works. Just kind of, once you know that, then it's literally just changing the way you think about things. That's all. Going from artist to technical.
One thing that I'm sure you can relate to, but probably people in other programs maybe don't relate to, just because they're not such heavy applications. But I feel like after a while, you get very intuitive at knowing when it's going to crash. It's kind of like you feel like even though nothing's changed, you just know, like, I got to save my file because the next couple of clicks is going to crash. So and it does every time, and you can't really base that on any feeling. It's just you know the software well enough that you know its weaknesses. Yeah. I was curious too, like obviously you've worked on plenty of amazing projects. I'm curious, like, for you, are there any particular ones that stood out as being quite memorable, challenging, whatever it might be? Like, I'm just kind of curious if there's any that for whatever reason stood out more than others. I
mean, I've been on quite a few shows that have a lot of visual effects that we weren't expecting. A lot more, they start out, they say, oh, we're not a visual effects show. And then the next thing you know, we're like, building an ice lake and all sorts of crazy stuff. But I would say the one that stands out to me career-wise the most is Defenders, because that was like the first big show that I was on from start to finish. I wasn't the VFX supervisor, I was the on-set soup, but I was sort of under the wing of John Kilshaw, who was another very experienced supervisor at the time. So I was really lucky to kind of have a break there with him and with Zoic. So that show was huge. There was it was a fun show. It was also a very crazy show. There was a ton of stunt work, which was probably the most fun stuff. They had a huge stunts team, and I think most of the time when I showed up to set, it was usually because there was a brawl, between 20 or 30 people with a lot of wire pulls, some face replacements for stunts and all sorts of stuff. And, it was just, again, it was one of those shows that was just crazy. We did everything. I mean, we drove cars through windows, we blew things up.
It's always fun.
We pulled people out of a building. It was like, we blew up a building. Not for real, though. That was really all.
Just to interrupt for one sec, but like, I find it funny now that there's something I've done on LinkedIn. I don't know what, but I now get contacted all the time for actual like engineering, building, destruction, like pyrotechnic gigs. And
oh,
it's like, no, like I supervise this stuff. I don't literally blow buildings up. So I find it funny. They keep popping up now. It's just like, I wonder, if I could fool some people. Like, my math isn't that good,
Oh, that's really funny. That's hilarious.
But sorry. So yeah, like Defenders, like, what was that experience like? Obviously getting to be involved in a big IP, and especially big New York specific IP, but obviously they had one season, but for you, like, what was some of the biggest challenges on that project?
Oh, well, I mean, it was my first foray into being not my first time on set, but it was my first time being on set without the VFX supervisor, helping me out. So
Yeah, no
that
hand
was
holding.
scary.
It's all on you.
It was like,
You're
oh
the
shit,
fall
this
guy.
is all on my shoulders. And yeah, that was like pretty intimidating. And it was again, tough schedule. We had a lot of stuff packed into every day. I think we were shooting like 11 pages or something a day, or 12 pages. It was a lot. But at the time I didn't know. It's like, sure, I don't know, sounds good. Yeah, like I said, it was my first time really kind of having that responsibility, which was scary. We had some tough schedules, we had some tough personalities. And yeah, I mean, I made it through.
Congratulations.
But it was, I won't say it was easy. It was a lot of fun, and it was worth it in the end. But yeah, it was definitely a challenge for sure, all of it. I mean, it was, I can even give you an example. I think the first time I was on set with them was just something very simple. The second time I was on set alone, we had this sequence where Sigourney Weaver and Electra, I forget the actress' name, they were fighting, and there was a big tomb full of blood that she was, she emerged from. And so that tomb full of blood was leaking slowly throughout the night. So it kind of ended up leaking in a way that it kind of made a big square around the mats that they were fighting on, that were beautifully scenic to look like concrete. So that was sort of one of those, what are we gonna do kind of moments, where you just have, it's fine, I stayed calm. Apparently, according to everybody, I was the calmest person in the room. So I was like, okay, great, good.
On the outside, you're
on
very
the
calm.
outside, yeah.
I've always found that interesting when you learn that you can start bartering shots a little bit, because I've had that where something completely unexpected happens, and it's like, okay, I'll take that on if you take these 2 shots off of my my list, and it happens.
And it was one of those things where it was only my second time kind of having that responsibility. So I was like, oh my gosh, we just added all this stuff. What it's my fault. And it's not my fault. It's just what happened.
That's right.
You just have to be okay with answering to it. And it took a while. It took a couple of years for me to be like, okay, it's fine. This is just what happens. And we figure out a way around it. And yes, we either barter with shots, or we figure a workaround. If there's something that I can do on set that day, then if I can take photos to make it, get textures of something to make it easier, then I'll do that. Getting over that initial hump of the fear of like, oh damn, this just happened on my watch, what do I do? And then
it's always intimidating too. I was actually talking with Chris Keller. He's a VFX soup for DNEG in Vancouver. I was talking with him yesterday, and he was mentioning, like, going on set, it's like you're afraid you're going to do something wrong and get fired. And it kind of is that way like the first few times, because like I remember on Superman, I had my BlackBerry back then. It's just like I'm literally ripping out the battery because I didn't want to like make a noise turning my phone off, just freaking out that because it's so quiet, like you'll hear a pin drop and you don't want everyone looking at you. I guess like I'd love to hear your opinion too right now on the state of the industry, because that's one thing that's kind of crazy is just how much visual effects work is around. Whereas like 2012, I felt at least for New York and LA, there was definitely a huge dip as things started to go to Vancouver and other places. And but now it's just insane. It's like it's definitely the artist's kind of dreamland at the moment in terms of opportunity. So like I'm curious for you, like what your opinion is on the whole global VFX industry.
I will say the pandemic has definitely boosted it in a kind of psychotic way. Backing up just before the pandemic, I just think that VFX is just becoming a thing that productions, they just want more of it. I don't know. I mean, there's, showrunners and writers, like they're just imagining more and more crazy scenarios that just are not shootable or not doable in the production schedule time. Actually a lot of the times some of the work that we get is like seasonal stuff because they're just not shooting for the right season. And I don't think that that's, a wish coming from the writers or anything. It's just scheduling wise. And that I don't really know why those decisions are made. I assume that it's just time, money, budgets, the decision is made somewhere else. But I've definitely had a handful of shows come at us with like, hey, we're shooting this in July, but it needs to be winter. So stuff like that. And then I will say the pandemic has definitely, everything was down for 6 months. And I think every network and studio was just really, really eager to get back and just blast all of their platforms with as much content as possible, because now, we're so much more of us are home, and the audience is bigger. It's like it's been a bit of a mad dash and a bit of a gold rush. So with that, I think also came some kind of crazy production schedules. And I've noticed, I don't know where it's coming from, if it's just a younger generation or what, but I have noticed that the expectation is more that just VFX is there to, like, they're just going to shoot what they want. VFX is going to clean it up. So even shows that come at us and say, hey, we're not a VFX show, we're still doing a whole bunch of cleanup, wires, it's not even cables. A lot of the times it's reflections. It's just, they want to shoot something, and there is no way to shoot it without being in the reflection of a car or a mirror or whatever. I see lights in the reflection all the time. If I've got, soft boxes, it's in a reflection somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating, because you're right. At the same time, I think that people get way more comfortable with fix it in post used to be a thing, but now it's kind of like everything, is just a big mess, and it's like, this is your problem for later.
Yeah.
But I guess at the same time, a lot of tools have gotten a lot more intuitive, where it's not like you're hand tracking everything, and even paint is becoming a lot easier. I'm curious for you, is there any tech that you've got your eye on or you're excited for that's coming down the pipeline, whether it's AI for helping with roto or virtual production or anything really?
I mean, I would probably say virtual production. I haven't really gotten to sink my teeth into it too much. Charlotta, another VFX supervisor, and I, who are friends, I
know Lotta. She's been on the podcast.
Oh, great. Awesome.
She's awesome.
Oh, of course. Yes. I think I saw her thing. We put together like a panel in 2020 when everything kind of first went down, where we had this big panel with some people who were big in virtual production, just to kind of inform, we did it for the Post Alliance, and it was just sort of to kind of inform the audience about, the technology and what's involved, how much it costs, the logistics. One of them was, do you know the company Silver Spoon?
Silverfin?
Silver Spoon.
Silver Spoon, sorry.
We had Dan
no,
Pack.
I don't.
Okay. Well, they're just, they are a mocap company, but that also got into LED walls and virtual production. And they were using their mocap technology to do the camera tracking, which I thought was neat. And then we had another virtual production producer who just was able to give us more information on the logistics and the cost and the timing of building walls, because that's just also something we have to think about as VFX soups.
Yeah.
If we're going to suggest having an LED wall as opposed to green screen. It's something that I'd like to get more into, but I know budget-wise, it's just not really in the cards for a lot of New York shows. But yeah, that's one that I think is really cool. I have been a little bit out of touch in the sense that I'm not on the box as much anymore with technologies. So the last time I got really excited about something, it was like Keen Tools, which I think is like probably old news by now. But I still think the deepfake AI stuff is really interesting. I still do get a lot of clients coming to us saying, hey, I can do this filter on Snapchat. Can you do this for cheap? And it's like, well, no, I mean, there's still, I looked into it. There's still some manual labor involved.
I find it funny though, when someone does kind of match things to like, well, this app does it, so, you should be able to do it. But there's such a very big difference from even like deep fakes. Like there's a very big difference between like essentially stabilizing and warping a face a little bit, or actually training like a GAN model to be able to recreate from scratch someone's face and mannerisms. So and also, I mean, the deep fakes, those things, it's always done with images that have a clear view of this person's face, and then client will come to me where the person's got like hair and shadows and just crazy things happening across their face, and it's like, well,
it's the same issue that we would have if we were just doing a head replacement. We've got to roto all this stuff.
Yeah.
So there still needs to be a human element for a lot of it. I think people just see it and they think, oh, okay, well, if there's an app that can do it, then you guys must be able to do it for cheap. And it's like, well, why don't you just get the app?
That's right.
Get the app.
$2.99 in the App Store. Like there's the budget. I just got a couple more questions, but I guess one would be just for any up and coming people who, you know, just in terms of general advice to really help them thrive in the industry. Like, what would you recommend for people starting out, just in terms of getting ahead?
Yeah, I guess for students and people just kind of starting out, I would touch back on what I said earlier about, you know, if you're a creative person, try to punch up your technical skills. If you're technical, try to punch up your creative skills. I just really think that that's like a huge advantage. And it's usually more often it's like creative people who don't have the technical side. And I think the technical stuff, it's not as hard as you think. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more methodical, and it's easier in a sense because in the sense that like you can control the amount of it's up to you, basically. Yeah. You can control the constraints, right? I mean, it's up to you as to how much you want to focus and learn, and how much you want to let that frustration take over instead. So I would just say that that's one thing. To touch on something you said earlier is to be somebody that everybody wants to work with, be personable, be open to doing take on as much as you can. You know, obviously don't bite off more than you can chew, so you do a bad job. Mm-hmm. But, you know, take on projects, you know, take on stuff, ask for work. Don't just sit there and wait for it to come to you, because I think that's something that, you know, when you're working in a studio, people see it. You know, they want to see somebody who wants to do the work. So yeah, I don't know, just be happy to be there.
Yeah,
you know, make cool stuff and be happy about it.
I think it's really great advice. Yeah, just in general too. I think that the more that people are aware you're around and you're hungry for work. Like I had someone just the other day like frustrated that he's got this one task he's unhappy with, but he's not actually coming to me or anyone saying, hey, can I, you know, what else can I'm doing this, but what else can I do at the same time just to keep my sanity or whatever. But if you just hide in the corner, no one's
just asking for, I think that's another thing, asking for help. And I think I will say, when I first started out, I remember kind of being like, oh, what if I ask a question and, you know, people think I'm stupid or something.
That's another great point.
You just have to get over it. And like, if there's somebody else in the room who's making you feel stupid, that person's just an asshole.
Yeah, you know, that person's like, stupid.
That person's stupid. Just ask if you don't know something, don't be afraid to say you don't know. Just, especially if you're new, you have all the reason in the world to not know something, and it's totally fine. Because you're just, now you'll know it.
I think that's a really valid point to bring up as well, just in general, is that I think you're right that a lot of people do expect that they should have all the answers, and especially also I think it's counterintuitive that a lot of senior people think that they're in a lead or super role and therefore they can't ask questions, they should have all the answers. And I think the reality is, the more that you're self-aware that like, well, it's okay for me to ask a question, it doesn't mean that I'm stupid. It's just, if anything, I want to actually have context and learn, you know, no matter how far down my career I am.
100%. I ask questions all the time. I mean, I was talking to my comp soup last night about some face replacement stuff that I was just like, man, there's rolling reflections over this person's face. I don't know. Like, help. Like, what are we going to do about this? You know, sometimes there's stuff that you just have to be confident. That's all.
That's right.
Have the confidence that asking questions is okay.
I kind of feel like we already kind of covered this a little bit, but I was going to say if there's any specific lessons you learned early in your career that kind of stuck with you throughout your career.
Let me think. I mean, early on in my VFX career or my...
Well, I guess it kind of goes back to also what we're talking about in terms of learning to ask questions and things like that too. Like there's going to be times where failure is like a very similar topic where people see, I think there's two camps of people. Some people who see failure as like avoid at all costs, and then other people who see failure as actually just part of the process. And I think for me, there's definitely been, in fact, I was just talking about this the other day. It's like I learned a valuable lesson when I was 17 trying to get into video games, where I had badmouthed the employer and then it got back to them. And so when it came to the interview, they're like, we'd love to give you the job, but unfortunately you said all this trash about us, so we're never going to hire you. And I was so grateful for that lesson, especially earlier on, whereas it might have been more crippling to me down the line. So in a lot of ways, there's certain things that I've taken with me, because it's like, okay, I don't talk shit about anyone because it's a very small industry. And at the same time, like, what's the gain from it? And I think even just the habit of like not speaking negatively about people or situations, it's good to train yourself around.
That's a great lesson. I think I've been lucky for that not to happen to me, but no, that's a really great lesson. And for me, I don't think I have one specific like anecdote. It would just be kind of the same stuff that we've been talking about. It's just, just work hard.
Mm-hmm.
Working hard is actually the easy part. So, you just got to be prepared for when you meet the right people. And definitely don't talk shit about people.
I like it. No, this has been really great, the chat, so I appreciate your time. Where can people go to find out more about you?
I have a website, but I don't keep it as up to date as my LinkedIn and my IMDb. I'd go to my IMDb. I mean, that's kind of that will usually have my latest stuff.
Cool. That's great. And I'll make sure to link to everything in the show notes. But again, thank you so much. It's been really great to chat.
Thank you for having me. This was really nice chat this morning.